is to give you one class or one lesson that I wanted you to pay attention to the most. If there was one particular thing that I wish you could constantly reference and be sure to master, it would be today's lesson. The last couple of days we have done talking about the roots and solving quadratics. But the essence of those is the graph, because the graph gives us a complete interpretation of what's going on with that equation. We're able to see what the actual equation is doing when we look at the graph. You'll notice even on this page here, it says today's plan is to graph parabolas, and there's no calculators allowed. In the past, and this isn't to knock your previous math teachers, but in the past, your math teachers have basically said, okay, get out your calculators, you type in the equation, boom, you look at the graph, and then you copy over the table. And that gives you all the points that you need, and simply put, you don't have any idea what you just did. Today, you're going to learn how to graph a parabola. And I'm going to tell you that there will come a point to which this will be a 40-point question on your test. If you pass it, you've passed the test in essence. If you don't get the question right, you have failed the test completely, all because you don't know how to graph a parabola. It's that serious to me. You must know how to graph a parabola. We will use this so many times throughout this year, and never will you be given a calculator. So if you don't understand how to graph a parabola, you're going to be stuck. So make sure today's lesson is something you pay attention to. I don't care if you think you know how to graph a parabola. I want you to watch this lesson today. Okay, there are 4 steps in graphing a parabola. In fact, anytime I teach you to graph, I will probably use the same basic 4 steps. Obviously, there won't be a turning point because it won't always be a parabola, but it will always start with find the y-intercept, find the x-intercept, and then, of course, sketch it. We'll always have those 3 root pieces in there. The intercepts tell us so much about a graph, and it can give us a quick picture. Remember, I need you to be able to do 45 questions in 2 minutes or less, and that includes graphing. I need you to be able to kick out a graph. Now, at no point on the test is it going to say, graph this on a sheet of paper. It won't. It will never do that, but it will ask you questions that will force you to look at its graph. So knowing how to graph a parabola fast allows me to actually answer the question that they're asking, because it's not just what does the graph look like, okay? So we have to have a good handle on how to graph parabolas so that we can do it quick and then ask further questions about it. And we'll get to those questions eventually in this course. So let's look at this first one. It says define the y-intercept. What does that mean to find the y-intercept? Well, to find the y-intercept happens when x equals 0. It happens, if you think about a line, for example, it's on the part of that axis. When it crosses here, that spot there is when x equals 0. That's what that means. This is usually the constant. It's the easiest one to find. That's why I put it as the first step. So when we look at an equation, it is that simple. So I'm going to do a question at the same time as you see here. So I have y equals x squared minus 6x plus 8. What does that mean? That means to you that the first step in this thing is we are going to find the y-intercept. And to find the y-intercept, it's as simple as that. It is 8. So I already know right away, just looking at that equation, boom, there's the y-intercept, 8. Easy, easy, easy step. The second step here is the one that requires the most work. This isn't necessarily difficult per se, but it is something that requires the most work. The x-intercept, on the opposite of the y-intercept here, is when y equals 0. It's when y equals 0. This is the one that usually requires some kind of solving or factoring, okay? And so this is no different. If you'll notice what we're going to do, the y-intercept we have is 8. That's when your x's are 0. And so if you were to plug 0, that's how you got that 8. Now let's do the x-intercept. The x-intercept is when y is 0. So what we do is we put 0 in for y, and we solve that. Well, that looks like the last 2 days. Good, good, I should. And what that means is we've got to factor this baby. So, FTB, factor that baby. X and x. What multiplies to give me 8? Great. And now our signs. Are they the same or different? And that makes them both. Now we solve it. Wonderful. X equals 2, x equals 4. And that gives me my x-intercepts and my y-intercept. Now, already we should be able to do this. Already we have a great feel for this graph. We know it crosses the y at 8. I know it crosses the x at 2 and at 4. And let me just take a moment to caution you a little bit. Where most people kind of mess up is they mess themselves up. They mess themselves up because they don't think about their scaling. If I'm saying that this is 8 up here, then 2 is not over here, and I'm going to use a different color so it's not here. That wouldn't make sense that this gap is worth 2, but this is worth 8, would it? So we have to be very careful when we're drawing, and if you have to, I wouldn't necessarily encourage this because I really don't want people wasting their time doing little hash marks, is doing that. I'd rather you not do those, to be quite honest. But for some people, this really makes a big difference. And you know who you are. And if I call you out on it, you're going to find that it'll be a little embarrassing for you. But you've got to understand perspective. Okay? If your depth perception is off, then you need to make sure that you're drawing those little marks. So 2 and 4. We've got it marked. I'm sorry, my orientations is off today. We'll fix that after. So there's my parabola. Already I have this parabola. Now, how do I know that it opens upward? I'm already drawing this thing. How do I know that it opens upward? What tells me that? Exactly. The x squared term. If the x squared is positive, then it is smiling. It's opening upward. If it's negative x squared, then it opens downward. It's sad. It's negative. Negative people are sad. Okay. That gives me my y-intercept. That gives me my x-intercept. We're just about there. We need the turning point. Well, the turning point has 2 cool parts to it. There is an equation that you can use, and so for some, that just works great. But some of you, let's be honest, can't ever memorize an equation, and you always have to look at those reference sheets and stuff like that, no matter how hard you try. So what is another trick? Whoa. The equation part of it is x equals negative b over 2a. Believe it or not, the first part of the quadratic equation. Or sorry, quadratic formula. We'll deal with that in the next couple of days. The quadratic formula, of course, has x equals negative b plus or minus, and we'll get into all that, but it's all over 2a, and we'll definitely point that out. So you could use that equation. It's also known as the axis of symmetry. All of those terms should be something you're familiar with. Another way to look at it is always in the middle of the x-intercepts. Always. It's always halfway between them. If your x-intercepts are 2 and 4, like you see here, it's going to be directly in the middle of that. It's going to be at 3. So I know that my turning point is going to start with 3. It's halfway between 2 and 4. Easy. So how do I find that y part? Because a point means it has an x value and a y value. How do you find the y? By plugging it in. Great. So we're going to take our equation. Y equals. And in place of x, I'm going to put that x value that we just determined as being where the axis of symmetry is, where that turning point begins. So I've got 9 minus 18, that's negative 9, plus 8 gives me negative 1. So this is the point 3, negative 1, and that looks relatively correct. Oh my goodness, my orientation's off. Sorry. So that is negative 1. So that is the point 3, negative 1, and we're good. And I've already got it sketched. Let's do another one. I'm going to clear that page here. Let's do another one. All right, let's do another more challenging one here. We've got one with a negative in front. So that already in your mind you should be thinking, okay, this thing opens down. Good. Okay, so let's get right to it. First step, y-intercept. What is the y-intercept? 12. X-intercept. That's going to require me to factor. It will just about every single time. So all I'm going to do is set that thing equal to 0. I want you to pause this video for a moment and go ahead and factor on your own. I'm just going to do the answer here, and I'll have you check back in just a minute. Okay, at this point, you should see the answer here. You'll notice that what I did first was took out that negative. Now, I did that for your benefit, mainly because most students have trouble with a negative in front. Most students, when they see the negative coefficient here, it messes them up. So I just factor it right out. You'll notice it just changes everybody's sign, and then I can factor like normal. It just works out a little bit nicer. It doesn't become quite as confusing. So you'll notice that's how I did that. And the rest of the factoring is pretty self-explanatory, hopefully, at this point. So the last part of this, of course, is that I've got to find the turning point. And so the turning point, okay, so the turning point, remember, it's halfway between -6 and 2. If you have trouble with this, then I would suggest maybe you going to negative b over 2a. And I could show you an example of that. Maybe this would be a good time to do that. If I give you an example, that would be x equals, what's b? B is that middle term, so negative b would mean that that's going to be positive 4 over 2 times a. And a, of course, is -1 in this case. So it's 4 divided by -2, which is -2. It should make sense that halfway between -6 and +2 is -2, believe it or not. Pull 4 away from that. And so that's where that comes from. Again, though, that's just the x part. To find the y, you plug it back into the equation. So let's do just that. I'm going to do that over here to the right. So y equals negative x squared minus 4x. Sorry, I'm running out of room here. I'm going to squeeze it in. So I have -2 squared is positive 4. Then we have the negative on the outside, which is going to make that negative. I have plus 8 plus 12. So that's -4 plus 8. So that's 4 plus 12, which is 16. All right, so that's what it looks like. Now, let's graph this baby. All right, y-intercept is 12. Again, if you want to do the hash marks, you can. I'm going to call that 12. I've got -6. I've got 2. And I need this thing at -2, 16. We'll call that up there, 16. That's where it's got to cross. So it's going to come from this dot to here to here. And from that dot, that's my turning point. So it's going to be the other side of that parabola. And that's your second parabola. Good? Okay. Last example I'm going to do for you today, and this is pretty simple, but I want you to see this different format. This is a pretty simply graph, but you know, when I say, okay, find the y-intercept, and you look at that and you're like, wait a minute, there isn't a constant. Hopefully that helps you, actually. Hopefully that's not a hindrance to you in terms of how to graph this. So what is that constant there? If it's not written, it is 0. Great. Okay, now the x-intercept. The x-intercept, as I've said before, you got to put 0 in for y. And just like before, these are those basic ones in which we need to factor. You got to factor that x out. Do not forget that, because 0 is a very important root here. Very important. Now, just so that we can use that shortcut again about the turning point, what's halfway between 0 and 4? Halfway between 0 and 4 is 2. So there's the first part of our turning point. We're going to plug that in. So y equals 2 squared minus 4 times 2. That gives me 4 minus 8, which is -4. And so that's the second part of this. So now let's graph it. I know it's got to cross my y-intercept at 0, my x at 0. Now, here's a huge clue. If y crosses at 0, so will x, because the only spot where y is 0 is where x is also 0. And then, of course, again, where x is 4. Orientation's driving me crazy today. And then we have the point 2, -4. Does it make sense that 2, -4? So does it make sense that this thing opens upward? Yes, it is a positive. So there you have it. There's my graph. A quick sketch of parabolas. And there's 3 examples for you. I hope you are able to do this tomorrow when we get to class. Certainly, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Tomorrow for your assignment, and this is kind of proof that you've been watching this video, I would like for you to come up with your own quadratic. Whether you find one on the internet, that's fine. Whether you look and come up with your own, maybe it's one of the previous examples or something, but I want you to come up with your own. And it will be part of class tomorrow. So thank you.